What's up guys, TopTierYugioh here, and today I just want to have a discussion about a very interesting quote that I heard from the new Black Panther movie. And hearing this quote really inspired me in a Yu-Gi-Oh sense, so I really just wanted to share that with you guys, because I think it is going to help a lot of you guys out actually, because the quote's about something that I see as an issue for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players. I know it sounds crazy actually for there to have been a Yu-Gi-Oh quote and a superhero movie, but this movie was actually full of tons of Yu-Gi-Oh quotes. It was crazy. Like, I went to go see it with my team, and I mean, we were just talking about it all throughout the movie. Like, oh wow, like this applies to Yu-Gi-Oh, that applies to Yu-Gi-Oh. You know, this is like a technical play thing. This could be like a deck building thing. It was really good, and it was just one of the many reasons why I really enjoyed seeing the movie multiple times actually. And so I would probably suggest that a lot of you guys see it as well, not for Yu-Gi-Oh stuff obviously, but for enjoyment, because it's just a good movie overall. But let's go ahead and get into the quote, and just for the context of the quote, it was said by Shuri to T'Challa after a mission, where Shuri is like the person who makes all the Black Panther's like gadgets and gear. She's sort of like quick fix, and T'Challa is like super agent. He's the Black Panther. He's like the main guy obviously. And so after a mission, he comes back, and she's saying that she has like an update for one of the gadgets or something. And so she's asking like, how did it go? Like, how did it work? Like, again, I have this update for you. And he says like, why do we need to change it? It worked just fine. It was functional. And that's where she replied with the knowledge. She dropped the knowledge on the Black Panther, and she said, and I quote, "Just because something worked doesn't mean that it can't be improved," end quote. And I thought that this was so simple yet so profound. And I think that this is so important because it often applies to deck building, where I see a lot of players take a list that topped and then play the exact same list over and over again without changing anything. And a lot of times they won't change anything because it topped, so it must be good, right? Or even if they do think about making a change, a lot of times they won't change it because they'll think, well, none of the builds that topped played this card, so why should I play it? So I guess I just won't play it. And I think that both of these two mindsets are incredibly detrimental when it comes to deck building. I think that when you're building a deck, you have to have a growth mindset. You have to be striving for constant advancement. And even though if you're starting from a really good deck, like a deck that had success in a previous event, you want to update it to bring you even more success. So you just can't be satisfied with playing a deck that did well at one event somewhere at one time, because things change. And so it's important for you to change your decks with that. And so I think that there are really 4 major things to be concerned about when changing a deck. And the first of those is that there could still be deck building flaws. And so even though a deck did well, it doesn't mean that everything about that deck is perfect. It could just mean that that person got lucky, or the opponents got unlucky, or the opponents made mistakes. There's a lot that goes into tournament success, and as much as we'd like to think it's all about like the player who played the deck and the deck itself were so good, sometimes like you just get lucky, or things just happened, or they just work in your favor. Your opponent makes a mistake, you get a no-show one round. Like, these things happen, and those are the things that you don't know just from seeing like top 8 X deck and then the deck list. Like, those are the things that you don't know about the event. You don't get to see that the opponent round 7 got food poisoning from like convention center food or something, and so he couldn't really concentrate. And so there's like sometimes a lot of little things that go into events that you don't see from just seeing the deck profile or seeing the list that tops. And so you really have to be wary of that. And so sometimes even though a deck did well, it doesn't mean that there aren't flaws. And so you have to be wary of that. You have to really look at a deck from like a theory standpoint and really try to understand why each of these decisions was made. You want to make sure that you know like why they played this card. Why did they play this number of this card? Like, why? How did they play it? When do they play it? What matchups is this good against? You need to know all of these things, and not knowing them and just playing the deck itself isn't going to be enough in a lot of cases. I mean, sometimes it'll get you there, but it isn't going to be enough to put you at the top of the game. And so that's the first thing you want to look out for. You want to check that there aren't that many deck building flaws. And again, just because the deck topped doesn't mean it doesn't have flaws. Now, the next thing is that the format is always advancing. And this also reminded me of another quote from Black Panther, which again, it was filled with Yu-Gi-Oh quotes. It was insane. But this quote was from Wakabi, and he said this to the council, I think it was. So he said this to T'Challa and the rest of the Wakanda royalty. And this is when he brought Killmonger to the throne and pretty much was telling them what was going on with him and whatnot. And and Killmonger's talking revolution, and then everyone's like saying this is crazy, and Wakabi said something along the lines of, the world is changing. There's going to be two groups of people, the conquerors and then the conquered. And I agree with Wakabi, and he also said, I'd rather be the former. And so we want to be the conquerors, not the conquered. And so the format is constantly changing, and from week to week as it changes, because everyone has access to the internet, people are changing based on what's happening in the previous weeks. So people are seeing what people played at the events that did well, and they're changing their decks to beat it. And so if you're just playing the deck that did well, people are changing their decks to beat yours, which puts you in a very precarious situation to where you're playing a good deck, but you may or may not have good results. And I know plenty of very, very good players, and I've heard from many good players myself that they specifically build their decks to beat other decks, like the decks that have done well in previous events. And so this is something that you really need to be worried about when you're net. I don't want to say net decking. I think that's such a negative connotation. But when you're gaining inspiration from a deck that previously did well, so you do have to keep that in mind. You have to think, how are people changing their decks to beat mine, and then how can I change my deck to stop that? Now, the next thing to worry about is if your local meta is different or changes. And so this is the case of when a lot of times you're going to go to a regional that's like in your state most of the time, or a YCS that's like in your state or a few states over or something. And in a lot of cases, or especially locals actually, but in a lot of cases a lot of the people, like you've seen them for a while, and if you've been playing for a couple years, you've seen these guys for years, you generally know what type of decks they play, or even what exact decks they're playing in this current tournament. And so let's say you copy a deck from a few weeks ago, right? But then in the event that you're at, you see a bunch of guys who are playing like Trick Stars. And then you're walking around the tables and you start seeing a bunch of Candinas and Lycoris everywhere. You see these cards all over the place. So obviously there is a lot of Trick Stars, but at the event where you got the list from, there may not have been as many Trick Stars, and so you might have to change your list to accommodate the number of Trick Stars that you're seeing. So you might want to change the side deck a little bit. You might want to add in some Chaos Hunters. Maybe you take out those Effect Veilers and you add in something else. And so you do have to keep that in mind as well, because the event that you got the deck from is very different from the event that you're going to be playing in. And so changes have to be made. And so the fourth thing that you want to do is adjust for your own personal deficiencies. And deficiency is a very loose term. It can mean sort of like your deck building deficiency, like you don't have access to a certain card. Like you may know that like Ash Blossom is a good card, might be the best hand trap for this situation, but if you don't have Ash Blossoms, then like you can't play it, so you have a deficiency in that regard, and so you have to replace that with something else. And I do want to talk about this specifically later in this video, but this is something you have to adjust for. But you can also have a technical play deficiency. And so I think an example that really sticks out to me is that, let's say you're a player who hasn't played in a while, and like you haven't played for maybe a couple months. And so right now, if you look at the meta, there's a lot of True Draco, there's Pendulums, there's Trick Stars, there's Invoked, and you understand what Invoked do. You know about Trick Stars, you know about True Draco, you know about Dinos. Those are all old decks. You know what all those cards do. That's great. But as a returning player, you don't know what Electromite does. You don't know what some of these new cards do in the Pendulum deck. And so you might not have time to test against that deck extensively, and you don't know what it does. And so maybe you change your deck to accommodate for that. So maybe instead of playing like Ghost Ogre or Ash Blossom, maybe you add in some Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries instead. And so you take out a card where you could possibly misplay, and you add in a card that's a little less thought intensive in how to use it. And so in doing something like this, you're reducing the chance of misplays. And I think this is actually a very smart thing to do. It's something that's really a good heads up play if you think about it. But if this player in this situation weren't to do this, they might misplay against Pendulums and lose. But now they could just Reaper Electromite and maybe win. And so that's another thing that you want to keep in mind. And this is something that I've also kind of dealt with personally, because I've had a lot of bad matches against like 60 card Lightsworn Shenanigans. I've struggled against that deck heavily since Grass has come out, and I do make concessions like this in my deck building very often when I go to events. like I might side a little bit heavier for that deck than I would anything else, because I know that I'm more prone to making a technical play mistake against them. Like, I remember at ARG Richmond earlier this year in January, I played against the 60 card Lightsworn Infernoid deck, something like that. It was like a 60 card deck, whatever. And games 1 and 2, he gammaed me. Like, he had a blank field. I tried to stop one of his spells and he gammaed me. In game 3, he's going first, and the first thing that he does is activate a 1-for-1, and I have an Ash Blossom in my hand. And so I'm thinking, I'm like, do I Ash this card? Like, he obviously plays Gamma. There's a possibility that he has it. But then I think, like, what are the odds of him actually having Gamma? He opened it twice earlier in this match. What are the odds of him having it 3 times? And that's actually a fallacy, because each game that you play is independent and mutually exclusive, and so the odds of your opponent having something in one game is not indicative of their odds of having it in another game. But this is a very common fallacy that I fall into very often myself. And what I did was I thought, well, he had it both of those games. The odds are low that he has it 3 games. And so I tried to ash his 1-for-1, and then he gammaed me again, made an Omega, took another card out of my hand, summoned the Decatron, and like did a whole bunch of stuff afterwards. And it was insane. I was very lucky to be able to win that match, but I almost lost it because of that. And that's why whenever I'm preparing for an event, I always side a little heavier for Lightsworn or 60 card decks, because I know that I tend to make these technical play mistakes against them. So again, that's why it's important to adjust for your own personal deficiencies sometime. And so again, just to wrap things up, you need to have a growth mindset when deck building, and even when you're inspired from a deck that did well at a previous event, you still have to think to yourself, like, how can it be improved? You still have to look for flaws. You still have to adjust for the format changing, your local format, the local meta, and again, for your personal deficiencies, because being able to improve on a deck that was already good just sets you up for even greater success. So why would you not want to do that for yourself? I think this is one of the things that separates a lot of the great Yu-Gi-Oh players from the average ones, because the average ones are just like taking the decks that did well and they're just playing that same deck, or they might be making a couple of changes, but those changes might just be based on like small sample size based experiences, not based on theory, so not really understanding the flaws and whatnot. Or they might not be adjusting correctly for the advancing format or any of these other issues. And so it's definitely helped me in the past. Like, I remember when I won that Philly regional a couple of months ago, I went undefeated, right? But it's not like the deck was something that I came up with myself. The week before, like maybe like 3 or 4 days beforehand, I saw that Johnny Lee had won a regional in Texas, and I saw his list, and I saw the list, and I was like, wow, oh my gosh, like this is just like perfect. This is like the best list. But it was also the best list for him. I had to make it the best list for me and for my regional. And so that's exactly what I did, and I went out and won my regional. And I think that a lot of you guys can do the same. Oh, but there is one final thing that I do want to mention, and that is sometimes the format can be solved to where there isn't a significant change that you can make to the deck in order to give yourself an advantage. And in those cases, you really want to master your technical play and your mental play. Because whenever the format is solved like that, like most of the decks are going to be the same, like 80 to 90%. And so the only thing that is going to separate you is how you play around your opponent's cards, your knowledge of the mirror match, and those type of things. And so you really want to focus on that when the format is solved. Don't make the mistake that I made actually at ARG Hartford, where I knew 100% that the SPYRAL deck from like YCS Prague, I think Rafael Nevin won. And it was like him and all of the CCG players used the same list, and there were like 3 or 4 of them in top 8 or top 16 or something. It was insane. And that deck was by far the best deck. And what I tried to do for my ARG in Hartford, like, again, it's like a completely different format, because it's like a week or 2 later. It's a different meta. It's in a completely different country. This is Prague. I'm in Hartford, Connecticut. So it's totally different. And so what I did was, I knew that the Prague deck was so good. Even so good that in mirror matches, it just came down to whoever won the die roll, and whoever went second would just beat whoever went first. And because of that, I thought that in order to have a good chance of winning this tournament, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to build my deck to beat this deck, right? And so I built a spiral deck that was 100% like geared towards like beating the prog deck. And so the prog deck tried to go second. I built my deck to go first. And I played cards like artifacts and different hand traps and all sorts of things that were specifically in there because I tested it and it worked against the mirror match against the prog deck. And what actually happened was I played 0 spiral decks, let alone any other deck from prog, which was insane because I built my entire deck to beat this one deck and that I thought everyone else would have seen and like also played, and then I played 0 of it, and it really hurt my results because of that. And so I think that's an example of the format being different than you expect, and again the local format being different. And so it's like I knew that something was the best deck, but instead of playing it, I tried to do something different, and doing something different actually cost me in that case. Whereas I could have played the best deck, and it had a much better chance against all the other decks of the format. And so that's just something to think about too. Again, I just wanted to share with you guys this quote that I heard from Black Panther. And I guess there were 2 quotes actually that I talked about, but there were plenty of quotes in Black Panther that could be applied to Yu-Gi-Oh! But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments section about a time where you thought something was the best deck and you either changed it or you stuck with it. How'd that work out for you? I'm curious. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in tomorrow's video. Sapphire,